Mom's not signing anything. She's just a retired woman. We let her feel included." The words landed like a slap. Light laughter rippled through the boardroom, some of it awkward, some of it genuine. Tyler grinned, brushing past the sting, like it was all a joke. But I knew better. I'd been in enough rooms like this to know the sound of a decision being made behind your back. The documents in front of me bore my name and the company's insignia, Wynn Industries, the legacy my late husband and I built. Contracts I hadn't seen, approvals I never gave. And yet, there they were. Signed, processed, already in motion. I looked at Tyler. He was still smiling, confident, comfortable, maybe even smug. The assistant VP, Bethany, I think, shifted uncomfortably across the table, avoiding my gaze. She used to triple check with me before sending out client communications. Now she couldn't even look at me. They all knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough to stay quiet. I pressed my fingers together to stop them from trembling. Not from fear, just from fury. This wasn't a misstep. This was an execution, and I was the one being cut out. I didn't say a word. I closed the folder gently and stood. My chair made a soft sound against the carpet, the only noise in the room. Even Tyler paused, as if finally realizing I wasn't laughing. "Mom," he asked, voice still casual, like he hadn't just humiliated me in front of 20 people. "Where are you going?" I turned to him and smiled, the same smile I used to use when he scraped his knee and tried to pretend it didn't hurt. "Don't worry. I'm just a retired woman, remember?" I walked out without looking back, heels steady on the polished floor, heart louder than any of their laughter. I didn't rush. The doorman greeted me with the same warmth he always had. No one needed to know today was different. In many ways, it wasn't. I was still Marcella Wynn. Still the legal widow of Charles Wynn. Still the name on the Penthouse deed. Still, as of this morning, the silent co-founder of Wynn Industries. But Tyler had forgotten something. Something crucial. I never signed away my rights. I just stopped talking. Inside the penthouse, the lights greeted me like memory. Everything was quiet, polished in its place. I hung my coat, took off my shoes, and walked to the office I hadn't used in almost a year. The bookshelf hadn't been touched. Neither had the antique filing cabinet that Tyler once called Mom's Fortress. He had no idea how literal that was. The safe key was still sewn into the lining of my winter coat, where I'd stitched it myself 10 years ago. Old habit. One that saved me more than once. The safe was behind the third panel on the east wall, hidden beneath a painting Charles bought on our 20th anniversary. A Georgia O'Keeffe original. Tyler never liked it, said it looked too abstract. That's what made me keep it. The lock clicked open with the same resistance as always. I reached inside and pulled out the only documents that mattered now. The original ownership contract. My husband's amended will naming me as primary controlling stakeholder should anything happen to him. Tyler's signature, notarized and dated, waiving full voting rights in exchange for early executive privileges. He must have forgotten. Or maybe he never really read what I asked him to sign after the funeral. Grief makes fools of the arrogant. Everything was intact. Paper doesn't forget. And neither do I. By midnight, I had called Leonard, my attorney, and Patrice, my personal banker. We didn't need fanfare. We needed silence. I told them what to move, where to freeze, and what to reassign. Effectively, quietly. Then I locked the documents away, made a cup of coffee the way Charles used to, and sat by the window while the city turned dark. Last Tuesday, Tyler refilled my glass before I could decline. I remember the clink of the bottle against the rim, the way he grinned and said, "Here you go, Mom. Just relax. You wouldn't understand these numbers anyway." Claire laughed, soft, polite, rehearsed. She always laughed when Tyler wanted her to. My lips had twitched in what might have passed for a smile, but inside something cracked. because I did understand the numbers. I had been the one to cover Tyler's first business losses 3 months into his bright idea of opening a design firm with 2 college friends and no plan for payroll. I paid the lease when their cash flow dried up. I co-signed on the loan for the second office when the first folded. I handled the estate taxes when Charles died, making sure Tyler didn't see the paperwork that would have overwhelmed him. I did all of it quietly, without asking for anything, except maybe one thing: respect. Instead, they turned me into a decoration. Every family dinner became a pitch deck. Claire always had a new branding opportunity or growth channel she was exploring. Tyler would talk about projections and scale and burn rates like I hadn't been reading profit and loss statements since he was learning to write his name. I had built global supply chain models before he ever had a LinkedIn. And still, they patted my hand like I was a relic, poured wine to keep me agreeable, told themselves I was lucky just to be included. That night, after the second glass, I stopped nodding. I let the numbers Tyler mentioned swirl in my mind: projected margins, capital investment percentages, debt service schedules. He had no idea I still reviewed financials for leisure. He had no idea I was taking notes. Later, when I returned to the penthouse, I opened an old folder labeled Future Scenarios. It was something Charles and I had worked on together in the early years contingency planning for leadership transitions. I opened a new document under the same name and began drafting. Not a plan, a replacement. By Thursday, the paperwork was complete. My lawyer, Dana, slid the final folder across her desk without ceremony, a simple signature, and every asset I'd quietly protected my properties, the equity in the firm. The penthouse shifted into a new trust bearing only one controlling name: mine. The credit lines tied to the company's operating expenses. Reassigned. The accounts Tyler used for payroll and client dinners, now flagged for oversight under the trust. The main office lease, signed back when Charles was still alive, still listed me as primary guarantor. Tyler had never updated it, never thought he needed to. I didn't tell him any of this. Instead, I returned his morning email with a warm, motherly response. Of course you can host the party at the penthouse. I'm honored you'd think of it. I'll just show up and smile. Don't let me get in the way of your vision. He replied with a thumbs up and a list of vendor contacts. He'd always been sloppy with detail, never checked which accounts paid, which invoices never noticed when balances changed hands. His arrogance had turned into a kind of blindness. He assumed I was finished with all this, that I'd finally given up control. And I let him think that. Let him hire the bartenders and the string quartet and the PR team that would plant coverage of the event in the Sunday column. Let Claire order monogrammed napkins with their initials. Let them decorate the rooftop terrace I still legally owned down to the last planter. I watched it unfold from a distance, never interfering. My name remained off every invitation, but the foundation of it all, lease contract brand name, still bore my signature. Dana called me Friday morning. "It's done," she said. "Everything is in the new structure. They won't notice the switch unless they look very closely." "They won't," I told her. "They've stopped looking." I stood by the window that afternoon, watching trucks unload crates of wine and lighting equipment into my lobby. Tyler's party, his audience, and my stage. The penthouse shimmered under soft uplighting and carefully arranged crystal. From the rooftop, the city looked like it bowed to the glass railing. Tyler's voice rang out over the sound system, charming, casual, confident, like he'd done all this himself. "We're here because of vision," he said, raising a glass to scattered applause. "Because we didn't accept limits. Because we believed in growth." There was no mention of me. Not by name. Not even a glance. I stood near the back, half-shadowed by a potted ficus someone had dragged from the downstairs elevator bank. My heels sank slightly into the deck, but I didn't move. The skyline before me didn't flicker. It had seen my name on the deed longer than most of the people here had known how to spell equity. Behind me, Claire's voice floated out as delicate as the flute of champagne she held. She should be grateful we keep inviting her. She said it like I wasn't 5 feet away, like I couldn't hear every syllable. I turned. Her smile dropped for just a second. I raised my glass and walked calmly through the crowd. Each step firm. The chatter softened instinctively, parting to let me through. Tyler was mid-conversation when I reached the mic. I didn't wait for silence. Actually, I said, voice even. I own this room. The words settled fast. Eyes turned. Phones dropped. I let the pause stretch just enough to make it clear I wasn't joking. And the documents you just handed out, I said, looking directly at Tyler now. You'll want to shred them. They're no longer valid. He blinked. Claire's hand tightened on his arm. I'm happy to explain everything, I continued, preferably in a room with attorneys. Then I stepped back from the mic, nodded once to the crowd, and set my empty glass on a tray near the bar. Behind me, someone whispered, "Wait, what just happened?" But I didn't turn around. I was already walking to the elevator where the new security detail stood waiting. The fallout started before sunrise. By 7, my lawyer had confirmed the party contracts were already void. By 8, I'd instructed the property manager to cancel the lease extension Tyler signed without my consent. The building's finance department tried to protest until I sent over the original deed, my name in bold, unmistakable font. That ended the conversation. At 9, I called the bank. Tyler's corporate cards were frozen by 10. Payroll and vendor accounts were moved into restricted access under the new trust. He'd discover it soon enough, probably, when his next client lunch was declined at the table. I didn't warn him. Warnings were for people who hadn't laughed. By noon, the office was whispering. My name circulated in hushed tones through the halls, half disbelief, half admiration. Some people avoided eye contact when I stepped out of the elevator. Others straightened their posture like something heavy had just been lifted from their backs. I didn't call a meeting. I didn't explain anything. The truth didn't need my voice anymore. It had paperwork and timestamps. Around 2, I received an email from Denise, my old executive assistant. The subject line was a single-word proof. Attached was a confidential accounting file. Transfers from the company's marketing budget round amounts recurring monthly, directed to a vendor that didn't exist on any official list. The account name was subtle, but clear: Claire & Comer Boutique Holdings. I stared at the numbers for a long time, the way one might study the shape of a bruise. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. And stupid, careless theft at that. Without hesitation, I forwarded the file to legal with a short message. Proceed as discussed. Full review, immediate action. No explanation, no emotion. By 3, I'd finished my coffee, closed my laptop, and slipped on my coat. I didn't stop by Tyler's office. I didn't need to see his face to know the panic had started. The sound of my heels against the marble floor was the only noise as I walked out of the building and toward the old contractor shop that still bore my husband's name. The old shop still smelled faintly of sawdust and rain. It had been empty for years, just a shell of steel beams and concrete tucked behind a quiet row of warehouses on the south end of the city. Charles used to spend entire weekends here sketching designs on napkins and pacing through half-built frames. After he passed, I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Now I was grateful I hadn't. The dust was thick, but the bones were strong. It had stood through 2 hurricanes and outlasted every commercial development in the area. I walked slowly, fingers trailing the old workbench, the outline of his tools still faintly visible, like a memory not quite willing to fade. By mid-afternoon, I was on the phone with a design firm. I want glass walls, I said, clean lines, soft finishes. And the name goes on the front, spelled out in full Win & Co., not W&C, not W plus Co., no abbreviations. I want it said clearly. They offered mock-ups within a week. I approved the first one. 2 journalists reached out the following Monday, local business columnists looking for comment after news of the credit freeze and Claire's boutique scandal had started to leak. I declined both requests. There was nothing to clarify. This wasn't a comeback and it wasn't revenge. I wasn't interested in headlines. I was interested in peace. Space that belonged to me, defined not by legacy, not by proximity to my son, but by intention, by clarity. I replaced the old lock on the front door with a keypad and had the walls repainted in soft, neutral tones. I chose a desk that curved inward and faced the front window. And I asked Denise my only ask to help me select new staff. No one with family ties. No one who needed babysitting. I spent the following Friday choosing the first art piece to hang in the lobby. A simple canvas, deep texture, no signature. Just presence. That night, as I turned off the lights and stood at the doorway, I saw the first delivery truck pulling up the road. The message came through the company website marked anonymous. But the language was too precise to ignore. The sender knew too much shipment codes, internal tags, vendor contacts I hadn't seen in years. They claimed Claire had been rerouting funds for months, pulling from marketing and PR budgets into a third-party account registered under a shell company. Boutique inventory was being padded with fake merchandise imported cheaply labeled falsely and sold under inflated margins. But that wasn't what made my breath still. What did was the attached invoice showing Claire had signed supplier contracts using my name. She'd listed herself as co-founder of Wynn Industries, claimed I had approved the partnership. Her signature sat below mine, lifted from old onboarding paperwork, scanned and dropped into new deals as if we were equals. She hadn't just stolen from the company. She'd used me to do it. I contacted the audit team that same afternoon. A quiet review was initiated, no alerts, no flagging to Tyler or Claire. The numbers spoke on their own. Repetition patterns, the same vendors, the same fake addresses, rerouted through courier hubs and drop accounts. It was both bold and lazy. She didn't expect anyone to check. By Tuesday, the findings were formalized and passed to the firm's legal counsel. That same morning, Claire received a cease and desist order via email, followed by a printed copy delivered to the boutique's front counter. I didn't wait to see her reaction. Instead, I walked the halls of the art museum. Not the new wing with its interactive exhibits, but the old gallery's portraits, with cracked varnish oil landscapes darkened by time. The ones you had to stand in front of quietly to understand. Justice didn't always wear uniforms. Sometimes it wore cardigans and low heels. Sometimes it said nothing at all. I stood before a painting of a woman seated at a table, her hands folded, a half-filled glass of water beside her. The plaque read, "Untitled Stillness." I stayed until the room cleared, then turned toward the lobby and called my attorney. There was one more file we needed to finalize. Tyler called twice that morning before I picked up. His voice was sharp, frantic, laced with the kind of panic he used to mask with charm. "You embarrassed us, Mom. This is still my company." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence fill the space between us until he spoke again, quieter this time. "We can fix it. We just need to show the board we're aligned." But we weren't aligned. We hadn't been for years. "I'll see you at 3, I said, then hung up. He arrived on time, shoulders tight, tie loose, the way he always looked when things were slipping. Claire didn't come. That was probably wise. We met in the smaller conference room at the new office. It was furnished but undecorated. Just clean lines and soft light. I sat at the end of the table, a sealed, padded envelope in front of me. Tyler sat across from me and opened his mouth to speak, but I slid the envelope toward him before he could start. He looked down, then back at me. "What is this?" "Your severance package," I said. "A pre-drafted resignation letter effective today. And a copy of your non-compete agreement." He didn't move. "I've bought out your shares." I continued at the exact market valuation from last quarter. No discount, no premium, just business. He tore open the flap and scanned the documents. His jaw clenched at the figures, but he didn't speak. This was never supposed to be a fight, I said. But you made your choices. Now I'm making mine. He looked at me like he didn't recognize who I was. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he only ever saw what he wanted, someone safe, silent, waiting to be included. You planned this, he muttered. No, I said calmly. You did. He signed the papers without another word. As he stood to leave, I watched him hesitate at the door hand, hovering over the handle. But he didn't turn around. He walked out like a man who'd just learned what it meant to be replaced. I stayed seated, staring at the empty chair across from me, until my assistant knocked softly to let me know the moving team had arrived. The silence felt different this time. Not hollow, not abandoned, just clean. I walked through each room slowly, noting what was gone and what remained. Claire's vases, the oversized velvet, throw the decorative bowl she never stopped moving around, like it meant something gone. The place looked a little bare without them, but lighter too. I had the dining chairs replaced first. The old ones Tyler insisted on, too sleek, too cold, were taken out in the morning. The new ones were sturdy, upholstered in a fabric I actually liked, and tall enough for small backs to sit comfortably during long dinners. I rehung Charles's first blueprint above the hallway console. He'd drawn it by hand before the company had a name, before we had investors or permits, or a real desk to put it on. Just pencil lines and measurements full of hope. I framed it properly this time. The office door still had a label, Executive, T. Win. I peeled it off and replaced it with a new one I'd ordered last week. It said simply, Mine. Then I opened every window. The breeze carried in the scent of the florist's delivery, fresh-cut stems, bright and alive. I arranged them myself the way my mother taught me when I was a girl. No symmetry, just what felt right. I didn't call anyone, didn't announce anything. There was nothing to say. I made tea and sat by the wide window that overlooked the river, the same view I'd looked at for years, while my name faded in other people's mouths. It felt different now. I didn't need the world to remember. I'd remembered for myself. The doorbell rang. I stood unsure who would bother on a day like this. When I opened the door, my granddaughter stood there in her school uniform, clutching a canvas backpack and a folded sweater. "Grandma?" she said, glancing past me into the quiet space. "Can I come in? Dad said you own the whole place now." I stepped aside with a smile. "Yes, sweetheart, I do."